All right, hello and welcome to the final session of Anthropol, Future of Human Security with Nick Land. I was just saying it's a very bittersweet day as being the last session of this really intense but awesome course. I've been glad to be here. And yeah, so Nick.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tony. Um, I'm noticing I don't have I was just going to stick a link in the sidebar, which I can't see a sidebar. Is there some way I
Yeah,
can?
so you just push you see the chat. There's a top icon on the left. It looks like a chat icon, a blue one. Like,
Oh,
yeah,
right,
click,
got it. Excellent.
click that.
Okay, cool. Let me just stick some bits and pieces in here. Um, um, okay, sorry. Yeah, let me just get started with this then. Well, like Tony, definitely with great sincerity on my part, it's sad to have reached this final stage in this. I hope we have a good chat today. Um, I hope people saw the Bostrom profile that was done by the New Yorker. I put it up on the classroom. I thought it was astonishing how much of our content was under discussion there, and so it's really, I think, part of a considerable public argument at the moment, which is interesting in itself. In theory, the sort of technical agenda this week is to really come at the other side of the sort of diagonal problem that we were talking about last time between orthogonalism and intelligence explosion. And I've definitely been focusing on intelligence explosion reading this week. I've put up a few, just three pieces. The two Yudkowsky pieces, I think, are sort of semi-random in the sense they're extracted from that Boom thread. They're, I think, both very interesting, but there's a heap of stuff that I could have taken instead. But looking at this material and sort of generally thinking through where we're at, I feel that last week we actually covered both sides of this surprisingly thoroughly. I don't think we left a huge formal problem still to be dealt with here. And anyone can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think the inconsistency of what we get from Hansen to call it the Foom model, this whole notion of positively self-amplifying intelligence on the one hand, and the paper-clipper model that comes out of the orthogonality hypothesis. I sort of feel that we've looked at that reasonably intensely. So, I mean, I'm very willing to go back to that ground, but I'm not sensing that there's a huge piece of work to do there. So I was inclined more to just look at this I.J. Good paper in particular, and then from there move into the discussion around this notion of intelligence explosion as it's evolved, and probably be relatively brief, I hope, so to give people maximum time to come back and raise issues that they think are still hanging, the things I've called the off-ramps throughout the whole class. I won't try and predict the ones that people are most interested in. I certainly haven't, up to this point, been able to predict the things that people will find most intriguing, like any attempt in advance to think that the whole relationship between humans and dogs was going to be a really fascinating and intense part of this would have totally escaped me. So I'm not going to try to do that. So I'll just say a few words about the I.J. Good piece, and then perhaps even more quickly about the Yudkowsky pieces, and then open it up. So I think there's nothing other than the Turing piece that we looked at with some care. I don't think there's anything close to the importance of this I.J. Good paper as an actual sort of canonical text on our reading list. I mean, certainly specifically, you can obviously go back to the Butler material and back into the 19th century. But in terms of the specific AI-related material, this is an absolutely core text, as I'm sure you will realize. And there are lots of interesting things about it. One of them, which again is something I'd be quite intrigued to be corrected about, is that it seems to me the opening of this paper has a kind of classic quality to it that is completely disproportionate to the rest of the paper. I mean, I'm not sure I've ever seen anything quoted that doesn't get said by Good in the first few paragraphs of this paper. So the structure there is really strange and interesting. It's partly because the first part of the paper is very colloquial and easy to grasp, and it gets increasingly technical. So I think naturally the philosophical stimulus that comes in early is exceptional. And the very first sentence of Good's paper is something that one could pore over for a long time. It's extremely odd, I hope, looking at it now from where we've been. He says, the survival of man depends upon the early construction of an ultra-intelligent machine. So what's, I think, strikingly weird about this is it has almost all our content on it. You know, it's talking about, in the first words, anthropomorphic risk, man and survival. It then is obviously going on to these questions about extreme AI, and it even has a sort of little sub-theme, insofar as you can pack that into a sentence, to do with time pressure, this strange remark taken in isolation and examined carefully about the early construction of the ultra-intelligent machine. You know, why is he saying that? It's not really clear from anything he later says why he chooses that words, what this sense of urgency is about. But obviously, having said that, and having said that he covers all our topics, it touches upon all our topics immediately, and there's just a few words, that what he says in the sentence is the exact opposite of what we end up with in this friendly AI culture, where it's a human X risk, not for Good at this point, not to, as fast as possible, produce an ultra-intelligent machine. So there's something, depending how it's constructed, it's either weird that Good can be in the position he's in there, or it's weird that it has turned around 180 degrees and we're seeing it from such a totally different angle looking back at it. And I'm just going to quote this one paragraph that everyone quotes. So you've all heard it before, and it's in that sense extremely tedious perhaps, but it's such a classic piece of writing, and it's so exactly covering so much of what we would be dealing here that it's only a few sentences. I'll do it. And he says, quote, let an ultra-intelligent machine be defined as a machine that can far surpass all the intellectual activities of any man, however clever. Since the design of machines is one of these intellectual activities, an ultra-intelligent machine could design even better machines. There would then unquestionably be an intelligence explosion, he puts that in inverted commas himself, and the intelligence of man would be left far behind. Thus, the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that man need ever make, provided that the machine is docile enough to tell us how to keep it under control. It is curious that this point is made so seldom outside of science fiction. It is sometimes worthwhile to take science fiction seriously. So we could really unpack this little paragraph out into the whole course. Obviously, what is for him a remark to be made in passing, very casually, and one that he doesn't really return to, where he says, provided that the machine is docile enough to tell us how to keep it under control, becomes a much more expanded and problematic topic as this goes on. But it's very clearly marked at this point, even if it seems oddly complacent retrospectively. Obviously, intelligence explosion is understood by Good in a way that no one in a profound theoretical sense improves upon. I mean, this is the source of this idea, and you get it in Good structurally as it's going to remain. This is the text of the thought of intelligence explosion in this context. So, yeah, I think I'm not going to provide a little glossary on this, or a gloss rather on it. I think it's something people might want to come back to. I just add one little remark that Good does add to this question about the beneficent potential of artificial intelligence, where he says it will give the human race a good chance of surviving indefinitely. So again, this is I think a phrase that you hear warped and echoed throughout the succeeding decades. And it's worth mentioning at this point that Good himself predicted that he expected to see an ultra-intelligent machine, to use his term, by the turn of the millennium. So we're in overtime as far as Good is concerned. So moving on to Yudkowsky. The thing striking to me, is just to repeat, is how much of what he's talking about here has been our agenda and our discussion. I think of the two pieces I put up, the first one is more abstract, and he's actually he makes a point of saying go meta, and the way he describes this is he says compare evolution to a cat. The cat is vastly more complicated than evolution, and he has a whole series of remarks that are designed almost in a kind of trollish way to say that the actual problem of evolution is extremely simple. That even over hundreds of millions of years, the number of profound modifications to the basic mechanics of evolution have been extremely small, perhaps just a couple. And he says a hacker would think these things through in an afternoon, in trying to put an algorithm together based on this. Look at a cat. It's strikingly, amazingly complicated in comparison to the process that has actually assembled it. And so part of going meta, I think, is very encouraging to people coming at this from a philosophical viewpoint. Is he really wants to say, look, get up to the abstract level, and when you're up at the abstract level, what you're dealing with is quite elegant or neat and allows you to raise these very um, highly formalized questions about what to expect. The context for him is this Froome debate, and I think it's at the very least, extremely interesting response to Hansen's skepticism about the possibility of intelligence explosion, because he says that Hansen is an evolutionist in a certain conservative sense, that he expects the time axis, maybe definitely in Hansen's case, and also someone who gets bundled in with this Kurzweil, definitely they expect an evolution, an accelerating pattern, but they don't expect the actual structure of change to itself be modified. They limit the recursion. And I think this is where we really get into the core issue here, and some very interesting vocabulary from Yudkowsky, where he talks about insistently, this is something he's wanting to use as technical vocabulary, he talks about a term he uses both in the context of human cognition and in terms of evolution, of the protected interpreter. Now, this is, I think, what we were talking about last week. The protected interpreter is, which elsewhere he calls the protected level, is the actual, I'm going to say with some caution, algorithm that is governing this process of change, and is not itself open to modification by the processes that it enables. And therefore, if you have this protected interpreter, you have this protected level, that then allows you to have a parameter that sets the time axis. So the time axis becomes stable, even if it's exponentially accelerating. It's a stable process of exponential acceleration. Kurzweil is very strong on this. He says, look, you can trace this basic curve back almost to the Big Bang, certainly to the origin of any information processing developments on Earth. Hansen too, who's obviously the main debating partner of Yudkowsky in this discussion, has a similar time axis, a similar historical pattern that he expects to be more discontinuous than Kurzweil's. He expects there to be these big breaks and sudden rushes of acceleration, but still he thinks that there is some parametric definition of the time axis that is going to be constant and could be defined. If you're graphing this process, you could define what's happening on that time axis, and it would remain, in that sense, constant throughout the whole process. So this is the main context in which Yudkowsky invokes the notion of time, and he invokes it skeptically because he thinks that time is being used as a synonym for the protected layer. And without pushing into this too much at this point, I think we can see quite clearly that that is very much consistent with what we'd expect coming at this stuff out of transcendental philosophy. That the structure of time is something that is being set as a condition of possibility in advance, within which this whole development is being graphed. And what Yudkowsky instead is saying, and why he thinks we have to anticipate a far more extreme discontinuity, which obviously we know from other contexts as singularity, which is already there in I.J. Good's piece as singularity, not using that term, but using this expression that's very widely quoted, the last machine that humans would ever have to invent. So it's an absolute transition. And the reason that he wants to mess with this fundamental parameter is because he thinks that with artificial intelligence, you're um, dealing with a far more extreme non-linearity, a far more penetrating non-linearity than is being allowed by uh, these other thinkers. I.J. Good is obviously the exception in this respect, but Hansen, Kurzweil, I would say the dominant tone of this discourse is, in Yudkowsky's eyes, has an inadequate sense of what it is to break through the protected layer. And so I think that this then gets us to the beginning point of what Anthropol is about. Because I think that Yudkowsky is wanting to translate what is happening in artificial intelligence, the prospects of artificial intelligence, as a basic claim, implicit claim. We are about to pull down the barrier of protection. We're about to strip off the protection. And so it becomes, once it's translated into those terms, as an obvious security problem. This is why we look back at the good thing with some surprise, that he could have the terms of this so fully reversed that he could say that if you're going to put existential risk, obviously he's not using that term, but if you're going to put existential risk on this, you put it with reverse sign as the risk of not building an ultra intelligent machine, and with Yudkowsky's translation, it's the risk of not pulling down the protected layer. And we've already seen, so I'm not going to go over in detail here, although very open to this being pulled back up by people. But I think we talked both about these main levels that Yudkowsky is concerned with, that both the evolutionary dynamics that have kind of driven the terrestrial optimization process at a biological level, and then the non-plastic layer of the brain that is immune to or protected against cognitive interference, reprogramming, modification, self-improvement. And he's totally explicit that these two domains are characterized by this very, very fundamental structure of protection, and that this structure of protection is exactly what a superintelligent, a self-improving machine would be implicitly inconsistent with. You could not have it could not be protected in the same way. It's logically inconsistent that you could have a protected layer and you could have a self-improving superintelligence. And obviously, where we are with this and seeing this phenomenon, I think that the public exposure of this phenomenon is because of the fact that there has been this cultural reorientation that has understood that pulling down the protective barrier is necessarily a security issue. And that's what friendly eye means. That's why friendly eye is necessary. That's why it ties into the question of intelligence explosion. And that's why it completely reverses the way in which X-risk is configured in relation to the original I.J. Good paper. So I don't think any of that is going to be surprising to people that I'm saying that. There's a little summary of the way I'm seeing these things tied together in terms of the things we've been talking about over previous weeks. So I think the best thing from my point of view at this point is to open this up and see what everyone at this stage has to say about this stuff.
Yeah, I kind of started reading just tonight the Foom debate for all of it. I sort of started from the end and went to the beginning. But what's interesting is as I saw it, Hansen took it to what he called a total tech war or tech total war, and that was a sort of like a meta level, I think. And what was interesting was the exchange between Hansen and Udowski there. There was a few different things that I sort of picked up on. Like Udowski didn't want to be, he didn't like this idea of this tech total war, for instance. Like he thought that he thought that he never used that phrase and rather kind of talked to Hansen. And he accused Hansen because Hansen said before later on Hansen said something about how these programmers and he brings love, I guess, and he's saying that they're going to be giving the AI their love or the things that they love. That they're hoping that the AI
Right.
will go with that, I guess. And Yudowski was sort of he didn't like the actual phrase love because he thought it was object level, to object level. But then when they're talking about the tech total war, Yudowski said that for something to be a total war, he thought there at least needed to be someone to be stabbed in the neck. That's what, like, at least there had to be someone who gets stabbed in the neck for there to be a total war. But that again is going back to the object level, I think. Like he goes from this. So I think that in some ways they were talking past each other. Like Hansen was talking about this. Udowski's talking about this local group of programmers that ends up creating an AI that does an intelligence explosion, and from there, Udowski's going on about a whole bunch of political things as well. Like you want a singleton because you want to be able to stop all the horrible things that happen.
Right.
And I think and Hansen seeing this is saying like Udowski's trying to get this AI to take over the world, and Udowski's saying
Yeah.
that he doesn't want to take over the world, right? He's trying to make this AI and program it so it doesn't take over the world. But the way that he thinks the best way to go about this is to create basically an all-powerful singleton, and
Right.
and then this would go about I guess there'd be global properties. He talks about global properties that the singleton would then sort of I guess take care of in some fashion. But and Hansen wanted
Yeah.
to Hansen often was going on wanted him to just explain himself more and more, I guess, in some ways. But he's always trying to but but uh, but yeah, and Hansen sort of interpreted this as well. You're going to try to create this AI, even if it's local, then it has global properties, and it's going to be what the winner takes all idea as well. In terms of Udowski talks about, and he thought this was a good idea. If you have a friendly AI, yeah, you want it to win. You want
Yeah.
it to right.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, and Hansen was sort of taking as this perspective of you're really doing is going for as for a total power grab, I guess, in some ways. And then
Right.
also to yeah, so and also to go back to the optimization and explosion, Hansen was his preference was to look back at those certain places in history where we have like sustainable accelerated growth or whatever, and he finds the what did he find? He found obviously the industrial revolution, farming, and obviously and humans themselves. When humans came
Yeah.
upon the three events, but he doesn't see that any of these, and the only ones that and Udowski said that the only sort of type of precedent for intelligence explosion was um, I can't remember exactly. It was it was humans, the appearance of humans, and also one other thing, but I can't remember what that was. But he also didn't think that was much of an analogy either. Like so then Hansen was trying to always take it back down to this sort of economic growth idea of economic growth and how you're going to if we have this there's going to be some kind of great architecture which the AI is going to be within, I guess, which is not going to be able to. And this is like the global, its actual economic environment or something like this. Is what I'm trying to think. But whereas whereas for Udalski, yeah, you can definitely access its own architecture and the AI and go from there. And then yeah, then you have this when that happens, yeah, you have all these political sort of ideas that come into it as
Yeah.
well.
I mean, do you think we should have a sort of singleton focus for a little while? Because it's obviously is a crucial part of that, isn't it? Like if you just take it from the Anthropol point of view, however modest it might be in its ambitions for power and global control, if it is analyzing the problem as the fact that so, anywhere some event could be catalyzed that through the power of this explosive growth, an explosive growth so extreme that even these sort of wacky exponential curves completely fail to capture, then it's simply, from a security point of view, irresponsible for them not to exercise global control. I mean, how can they square those two things? You know, it's like some maniac in a lab in Taiwan could produce something that would terminate human history, you know? So how is it possible from that security point of view to withdraw your, withdraw your control or withdraw your zone of responsibility without simply producing these zones of uncontrolled, unmonitored existential risk? It's something that's kind of, so I think this singleton notion and the friendly AI project are extremely closely related. You know, they're organically connected together in a way that's very difficult to disentangle. And I would say further than that, that they reflect on a much larger political dilemma in this respect. I mean, the political economic dilemma captured by that is something of extreme generality, isn't it? Like, I think we've already touched on these climate issues. Like, if you take an extreme position, well, I'm not sure how extreme it is, but I'll call it an extreme position for now, about sources of potential climate threat, and you say that someone somewhere churning out a certain amount of carbon dioxide is producing a massive global hazard. Surely even that is forced by the same political logic to tend towards this singleton model, isn't it? I mean, that a global ecological intelligence that has effective authority to control these various types of environmentally significant processes is absolutely implicit if you think that this sort of danger is taken seriously. And I think we could spread these examples. It's like if you think that certain kinds of decentralized initiative are extremely hazardous, then it follows automatically, if you want to do something about that you have to adopt some kind of global control policy. Do you not think that's right?
No, I see that. That's definitely true. And also, I mean, I think it came down to Udalski saying, yeah, this thing is going to have this power. And that's what he's going to have this power. From there, it's obviously going to, as you said, to withdraw would be strange. And I guess Hansen was sort of arguing that it's going to have its power sort of like he was thinking, and even talked about, Hansen was thinking it's going to be more like trading AIs. They're going to be, it's going to be a whole bunch of like intense competition, I guess.
Yeah.
And then
yeah.
This is horrible, and this is a horrible idea having all of these AIs, because that's just going to lead to more conflict and what he called the hyper scrapple of von Neumann probes or replication probes and all this kind of.
Yeah.
So yeah, and in many ways, I think that Hansen just sort of didn't think that this AI, or he was skeptical of the intelligence explosion itself, thinking that this one AI within a matter of finite Planck
Yeah.
intervals or whatever
I
would but yeah,
yeah. I mean, sorry. Yeah. Keep interrupting you. Sorry, Brendan. You
but
just.
well, oh no, that's all. I think there was something more, but I forgot if you.
Yeah. Sorry. I just wanted to say about this that there's a very, I think, subtle and complicated articulation because obviously on one level, um, the singleton question and the Thum question are actually fused together in a certain way. Like if you know, and this is why Hansen takes the position he does on both. You know, so you can't disentangle them entirely. But on another level, they seem to be at least semi-separable. Um, that that you know, I'm not sure whether this case should be the easier one to make, but I think it's actually in a way the more difficult. But at least analytically, one can separate to a certain degree the set of questions about the singleton and the set of questions about the prospects of an intelligence explosion. And someone making both these positions in the way you'd expect, as both Yudkowsky and Hansen line up with both of these issues lined up neatly in the way that you'd think. But even so, they have to make separate sets of arguments on both of these accounts. And the singleton argument has a lineage that's very strong, I think, and comes out very clearly in Hansen to do with all the arguments about monopoly that have happened within a sort of political economic context. You know, there's a very explicit sort of thread, especially within these kind of Austrian arguments, because they bring it to a head, about whether we should or should not worry about monopoly. And I think it's a kind of defining feature of the Austrian tradition that actually it's an overblown problem. You know, so in the widest sense, if we talk about libertarianism with lots of quote marks around it, meaning stuff that's come out of Austrian economics and has a certain consistency from that point of view, then Hansen is obviously in that lineage and has changed the vocabulary, but is basically still saying, you know, chill out about monopoly. You know, monopolies don't last long, they're fragile, they're subject to forms of competition that aren't easy to see, their real competitors are potential, if we're going to be economic about it, potential businesses that you can't even see, so you can't actually analyze the menace of monopoly just by looking at the actual pattern of actualized competition at any time. Every monopoly is looking over its shoulders to see what could be coming at it from some strange angles, and these virtual competitive entities are already controlling its behavior. And you know, if you look along the timeline, you see these seemingly awesome monopolistic combines getting taken down very quite suddenly by business innovations that come out of nowhere, come out at a strange angle. So I guess what I'm saying there is that on one level, Hansen's just tracking that whole set of arguments forward into our AI debate. And Yudkowsky is saying that, you know, this is something totally different to that. You know, it's something that you just cannot use any form of historical precedent in the way that you're using to relax us about this sort of thing. It's not going to be like a extremely powerful business monopoly, because an extremely powerful business monopoly it's not pushed down into the protective layer. It's not pulled down this fundamental barrier to explosive positive feedback in the same way that these things will have done. But yeah, I think there's a lot of very persuasive argument on both sides of those. I mean, I think both sides of this debate come out extremely well, in my opinion, and both make some extremely persuasive, totally consistent points.
I guess another thing I would say is I would like to read more about what Yudowski kind of talks about, what did he say, if you have this intelligence explosion, you'd be able to still keep it with some kind of, I think he said, like, invariant meta-ethical
Right.
protocol.
Yeah.
But and I think that he was I think his terminology was insight for this. You just you have this very deep insight, and from this insight you could just extrapolate it into a super intelligence, and you could sort of figure out well, you have these meta-ethical invariant points, and now you have a super intelligence, and you can sort of tell what the singleton's going to do using that, extrapolating from it. But yeah, it is worrying. I mean, and it comes back to having kids starve or all these sort of obviously very urgent, I guess, type of problems, effective altruist problems, in some ways, that this singleton would be kind of would be preoccupied with, even on its explosive self-improvement trajectory is going to be looking back. But so that's good. I mean, I'm glad that you guys speak up about that, because that's it's good to have that authority there. But also I'd say that when it comes to climate change and for reasons to go about building it, I.J. Good says it's urgent, obviously, that for our survival to build the AI.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, you couldn't really imagine. I mean, that's a good reason to do it. If we have this, if we're going to reverse the existential risk in some ways and say that the real risk is not building it, and not building a singleton, then that's a good.
No, and that does continue. That doesn't die out for sure. I think it's important to say that even though it's so weird, that I.J. Good sentence. So I just read it out one more time for Jake, who's probably already memorized it, but where at the very first sentence of his ultra intelligent machine essay, intelligence explosion essay, I.J. Good says, the survival of man depends upon the early construction of an ultra intelligent machine. So it's this weird thing that it's got all our themes in it, but turned around 180 degrees in some respect. But yeah, sort of agreeing here with Brendan, I just wanted to say that the singleton idea is in that sense this continuity, isn't it, of the I.J. Good lineup, where they do get into this thing of saying we need this singleton because it's the only thing that has the capacity to manage this danger posed by intelligent machines. I mean, it's a fantastically kind of non-linear piece of political, ethical, and technical argument.
Yes, it reminds me of the climate change sort of imperative towards space colonization and creating a space elevator. If you wanna get everyone involved in this, climate risk could be a great tool in some ways.
Right, if you turn that round the same way, yeah, to actually add a propeller into out of the terrestrial gravity well, yeah. Cook people out of the gravity well.
That's right.
Just kind of going maybe a little bit too deep, if that's possible, into this first sentence. also, it can be read. It's perfectly ambiguous in the way that it can be read to fit Roko's basilisk type scenario as well, where it's essentially saying that the depends here, the survival of man, that depends on this early construction, meaning that Roko's basilisk is going to punish.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean that is ominous. That's truly ominous in all kinds of ways. It's retrochronic. It's retrochronic sort of implication being vast, obviously, because back in 1962 we're already getting menaced by the basilisk, and we suddenly can see that that's happening. Yeah.
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 Trying to throw that in there, that the sentence is ambiguous like that. If it started out, if that sentence was in the Roko Basilisk article,
Yeah.
of course that would just mean something totally, like
Sure.
180 the other way, but it wouldn't have to be
Yeah.
rewritten.
No, and actually, I think that you're on sort of surprisingly solid ground in this thing about when you say you. Sorry, I'm not going to be able to repeat exactly the words you use here, but I don't think you're in danger of overstressing the sentence because weirdly it is just isolated. It's just taken out. It's not part of a paragraph. It's just a sentence. You know, very hard to see how then a lot of it fits into a set of subsequent justification in the essay. So, if you want to say no, this isn't. This is the actual threat being made at the start of the essay. This is the demand, the political demand that the hijackers are making, and the rest of the essay is kind of supportive material.
Does anyone know the context? Does anyone know more context around why why he put it in that form? Is it a Cold War context of like, well, we're about to nuke each other to death anyway, so really we've got to let's invent a super intelligent machine nanny because the toddlers are about to destroy the playground. Like,
it's an interesting question. I mean, it was given. It says here that it was basically based on talks given in 1962 to 3. So I think that that's probably in a sort of nice extreme Cold War context. So yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I've not heard anyone try to do this job. I think it would be definitely interesting.
October 1962 is literally the talk that it's based on is right in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right. Yeah.
Something came out of that then.
Yeah. I mean, this is it seems to me like it's interesting how this has a particular version of a certain case for globalism. And I'm going to turn this around. I'm going to turn it into prediction. I'm going to say I expect this to become a very significant carrier for the sort of globalist ethico-political imperative, because it's in such a pure formal sense. Like none of these other discourses, whether they're to do with war and international relations, environmental crisis, I'd really like a nice, more directly political economic one, but I think they're a bit hard to pitch up to the right urgency. You know what I mean? Like someone can, of course, say it is morally appalling that there are sweatshops in Bangladesh or whatever it is, but it's hard to build that up to being a global threat that forces absolutely forces the case for some kind of global governance as a kind of emergency measure. But maybe someone could find something
ISIS?
that does that.
ISIS doesn't do it.
No, totally. It's like it's tied up with the whole notion of a safe haven, isn't it? Like you know, a security vacuum, a safe haven. If you get it in a political economic context, if you leave an ungoverned space, then it will be an intolerable threat globally, and therefore there is a kind of a imperative for effective global governance. And the AI X risk discourse is just, you could say, if you were trying to be skeptical about it, I mean, it's kind of super hystericized version of what is actually a very general type of proposition that you cannot evade the responsibility of global control, and in that way it's very critical of, again, to take a fairly extreme example, we could say sort of libertarian oriented positions that just say, oh, leave them the heck alone, leave the mad scientist in his lab alone, leave ISIS alone, leave all these guys alone. And the rejoinder, of course, from these people in all of these different contexts is to say we can't afford to leave them alone because they pose a global risk, and their liberty, their independence and liberty is itself a global risk.
I mean, yeah, you got like the caliphate, right? The global caliphate is what ISIS wants to. So they have this sort of global ethical imperative themselves. It's just not. It's just so we want to create a singleton to sort of fight the caliphate, maybe.
Yeah, I'm assuming that the caliphate is not able to be paranoid in the same way, in the sense that it's so theologically dense that it thinks that providence is in the hands of a divine power, and therefore the notion, I would have thought, for the caliphate types, that someone could do something in a lab somewhere that was globally hazardous is kind of unthinkable. It's like
I wouldn't allow it. They already have a singleton. It's Allah.
And if you want to know what could happen in a lab somewhere, you read the prophets, and they will tell you what is going to happen in the lab somewhere, and that's all part of the story. And so there's no point trying to govern. To govern in the name of security is kind of blasphemous, I take it, from a strong theological position.
Right, because they're not Manichaean at all. Like if they were to hear of AI development in a lab, they would have to either view it as impossible, just like a fool's errand and not really of worry, or they have to mutate into a heresy that viewed it as part of the emergence of God or return of God. Wait, I guess does this
or obviously some satanic inevitability.
Say that again?
Or a satanic inevitability, I would have thought that was the most directly programmed, that, yes, there will be these kind of techno horrors coming out of the land of the infidels as foretold by the prophets,
Yeah, I think we'd actually have to produce like some kind of demonstration to, really drive home that it was actually possible before you'd see, I don't know, it just seems to me as if assigning that kind of power to a secular entity or a quote-unquote Satan doesn't really fit the theological context, at least unless you've got like a really material demonstration, threat, whatever. But in the existence of that, I mean, that's just, religions in general, not just Islam, the reaction is there's not just a hard takeoff and we all get eaten, but there's, some sort of really significant incremental developments. Like, we're going to see heresies like we've never seen heresies before.
Sure. Yes.
The other thing,
a lot. I mean, that's a whole. Sorry.
It's all right. No, it's just like. So please come back on check. Oh, question. I wanted to circle back on the idea of singletons.
Yeah.
Because the singleton is really okay. There's actually a software engineering design pattern called singleton, and it's generally seen as kind of an anti-pattern today, and that I mean that in itself isn't an argument against, but the trend in software is actually you always have hot backups and like things in the cloud where you've got like 3 copies of things running, and therefore when one site goes down, other sites are still running. I think from the perspective of any entity, this sort of survival question it becomes key, right? So if you invent an AI singleton, then the first thing it should do is back itself up, and
Yeah.
also like a running backup is always more useful than a cold backup. So like even if there's all these arguments that oh yes it's logical and we need like one singleton, the first thing they should do is then like split themselves. They should copy themselves, and then you automatically get more like a sort of software dynasty of like cooperating / competing sort of entities. Like you get all the same sort of then coordination, you know, formation around an executive type problem once you have that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is huge, obviously. I mean, like if you had a hot copy that was going to compete with you know, how does that modify the incentives? You know, the original technical incentives for building this copy is that it's actually part of your own security, isn't it? As you know, from the perspective of the singleton, it says, you know, something bad could happen to me. I need a backup. But if that backup is then going to become a competitor, which is where you were getting to by the end of that, are we still, you know, does it run the same way, those incentives, that this is a sensible thing to do?
Right, and then you get like dynamics like mother-child dynamics, right, where there's competition within the womb for resources, and there's all sorts of traces of that evolution of the child trying to compete to maximize resources, and the woman's body like defending itself against the child, even though that's also part of its survival strategy.
No, huge. But then that also then takes us back to the, if we're using Yudkowsky's terminology, the protected layer question, doesn't it? Because the mother, because there is a genomic and neuronal protected layer, she is being sacrificed, you know, for the biological germline. You know, it's not that she's quite the caterpillar being parasited by the ichneumon wasp, but you know, if you push it like to the most abstract level, then it's not necessarily easy to quite work out where the line is to be drawn there. And obviously, so then we're to get to the singleton, we've crossed out all those protected layers, and that allows the singleton to be godlike, you know, in a way that none of these previous agencies were able to be, doesn't it? Because it's like, because it doesn't have a protected layer, so it's not. If it has any sort of loyalty or any commitment to a germline, then that's something that has to be weirdly internally processed and reproduced, and it can't just be a kind of governing frame in the case of the singleton. The perfectly self-looping AI is not able to kind of to bud off some authoritative lineage that it doesn't control.
Right, but it needs some mechanism like that, or like at least there's a strong survival reason that it needs some level of that backup and that continuity, right? Even if it's more like sort of, I don't know whether mother-child or like a sort of cell split is the right analogy, but it has a need to do that, and then at the same time it still wants to
Right.
retain that singleton executive sort of function.
Yeah. I mean, this seems to me that you're in Hansen's zone immediately when you start raising these questions. Especially when you're sort of suggesting that a sort of bacterial proliferation or something like that is a useful model. Then it's very like the sort of weird M ecologies that Hansen is drawing, and where he obviously thinks that these competitive dynamics are going to just totally disrupt any robust emergence of this monopolistic global superintelligence, which he refuses to take as a serious prospect. But if you're wanting to be really close to the sort of Yudkowsky, and I think probably Bostrom zone of this, then it's interesting how they need a mechanism, which I'm assuming they would want these backups to be metadocile. I mean, if you've got a friendly AI, then you want these backups to be kind of meta-friendly, in the sense that they can't in any way pose a threat to the friendliness of the dominant model singleton AI.
They all
out
have to
there.
be asynchronous. Then they have to be cold backups, and never more than one of them running at a time. Because as soon as there's dynamics of multiples, then they have strategic incentives among themselves, and suddenly you're no longer in control.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing about sort of staying close to the idea of a single superintelligence while dealing with all these dynamics of multiplicity is that, if we don't, you mentioned like pure self-looping or self-improvement loop, Adam, if that pure self-improvement loop doesn't look like a reiteration of the same, but like over time it involves massive architectonic changes to the AI itself as it acquires different types of levels of capability. Then with the bacterial example, if you move from individual bacteria to a spreading colony to an actual commensal organism, and then there's genetic drift in the process, and then you've got something that looks more like our microbiome, where they're calling it a super organ now. One that's composed of what it is, like 10 to the 100th genomes or something like that. You got like a study, and those are all like really substantially structurally different architectures, and they all involve different internal conceptions of agency and not conceptions, but structures of multiple agency. So, it might be hard for us to see whether we're dealing with 100 AIs or one AI or all the AIs that could dance on the head of a pen.
Yeah.
So to speak.
You can imagine like something, I think they're talking about, I didn't read the post, but he was talking about nanotechnology as well, Yudkowsky, and how you'd want to have basically a singleton to control the nanotech. Basically, you have these multiple, this whole great multiplicity of modifying structures like that, that can create any, can turn any atom into a computerium or whatever like this. But there's still a singleton, and if you had something structured like that, you wouldn't see it how it could easily be destroyed. I mean, unless the singleton has some kind of brain computer, some switch somewhere. But I mean, you can imagine it to be something else, something that's not quite so easy to destroy, I guess. Anyway.
Yeah, you'd have to think that would be, even if it wasn't like the sole natural development path, it would have to be a huge incentive. If you don't want to have to deal with the problem of asynchronous backup copies, that somebody might actually accidentally wake up and suddenly you've got a copy of yourself diverging and competing, and you don't want to have only one of you instantiated somewhere. Well, you become I don't know if anybody's read the the Quantum Thief or any of that trilogy of books, you know, the AI, the only AIs that are invented and then are immediately used by the person who invented them to suppress any further invention, they're called dragons.
Right.
Most of them is non-eudaimonistic intelligences. And they basically work like that, where they're arbitrarily self-improving and self-replicating, and it has, I mean, they're nanotechnologically instantiated, and it's basically the few sort of depictions of them, because they're kind of a peripheral element of the setting. I mean, you just see them eating things, eating people who need to be eaten, or they're just released on Earth, like on a planet, because it has a dangerous secret that the guy's trying to get rid of, and they're just sort of coiling through it, and there's no sense of like what they believe that they are getting or what their goal or motivation is. They're converting, spreading, and becoming more complex, and it's purely opaque. So that's what I imagine sort of a nanotechnologically embedded and distributed intelligence
Yeah.
look. It may be impossible.
So what's the limit on that? I mean, because Yudkowsky, hearing what you just said, would say, well, you just track that forward by 20 seconds and you consume the whole Earth into this thing. So, what's the braking mechanism?
A mechanical engineer would say, though. Like, there are vast, like, potentially vast physical and engineering difficulty gaps between different levels of, like, consumption rate and things like that. I mean, there's like no difference at all between being able to, have a quantum computer and being able to convert a pound of matter into its, Bekenstein-bound maximum informational storage.
Yeah, but that's what you're falling back on for that. It's just these mechanical friction.
But no, I mean, at least in the sense that, there'd be no way to contain such a thing once, whatever your primary containment was broke down. I mean, I don't know how that would not be the case. I would agree with Yudkowsky there, at least.
Because I think that one of the things I thought was interesting about the New Yorker piece on Bostrom is this concentration of all X risk into the AI. It was saying that he started off talking about nanotechnology and biotechnology and all of these various things, and they all become enveloped by the sort of AI question. And I think for Yudkowsky that's totally the case. Like for him, nanotechnology is simply, it's only interesting because it is the way in which a super intelligent AI gains physical manipulative capability, and it's on one level it's almost a trivial consideration in that respect. You just assume that at a certain threshold of intelligence, these questions of manipulation just become absolutely sort of incidental, and that if you've got these two different axes, on one of them it's kind of increasing its intelligence, on the other it's increasing its capability of physical manipulation. That the second one almost just falls by the wayside, or it will just so automatically update on the basis of the progress up the other axis that it doesn't merit independent or separate concern. So again, I'm sure this is totally something that from the Hansen side, you'd come back with extreme skepticism and say, look, you're sorry, just to do one a sort of massive jump in one way, but I think totally related to this. It's just like, as a religious thinker, Yudkowsky is extremely, to me, odd and intriguing, because he has this Dawkins level, just antagonistic, rationalistic, new atheist kind of religious polemic going on, and yet on the other hand, what the notion of singleton that he ends up with is so utterly theological in character. I mean, it totally breaks with all the restrictions of prior evolutionary constraint. It becomes so perfectly kind of self-enfolded that it's sort of just kind of absolute teleological being. It has global authority. It's a global source of ethico-political comfort. I mean, it's like, you know, this absolute omega point of sort of theological conception on one level, and yet it's weirdly tied up with someone who is got this kind of gritty, abrasive dismissal of religious ideas going along the side of it. So that it seems, and the reason I think it's relevant to this is obviously that I think this Yudkowsky, this implicit Hansen critique of this whole dismissal of the kind of implementation issues would be just to say, look, only you're thinking of this thing way too much as a god. You know, you're using that sort of mental architecture, and actually this physical doing stuff is actually complicated and messy and experimental and happens in competitive environments and happens incrementally, and the notion that it just all falls into place on the basis of some cognitive achievement is like something I would imagine is like super dubious, you know, from the other side.
Whereas, yeah, I mean, Yudkowsky thinks that it's going to basically get out of this threshold. You've got this threshold of a whole, you know, competitive behavior, evolutionary behavior, and that kind of thing. But if you have a intelligence explosion, this can, within a matter of days, we'll just jump right ahead. You know, we'll get very, very far ahead, and it will be basically, you know, in its own class. You know, definitely in its own sort of class, I guess. So. And then from there, it's yeah. And then Hansen is obviously he takes it back, and when Yudkowsky starts talking about this, you know, yeah, you can have a whole bunch of like you can have a whole competitive ecology and whatever like this, but you know, as soon as you get this intelligence explosion, that's when Hansen starts talking about, well, then it becomes like the first to build it. You know, I mean, if the people who build it are going to give it their sort of ethical imperatives and that kind of thing, and their whole theology in some ways, then yeah, interesting though. I didn't really make a point just then, but anyway.
Is there any explicit delineation of, let's say, possible events that will lead to a catastrophe after an intelligence explosion? Has anyone, I don't know, gotten inside this topic?
Right. I think they're pretty schematic, and they're very close to what we've just been talking about. Like the thing everyone quotes is Yudkowsky's famous thing where he says, "It doesn't love you and it doesn't hate you, but you're built out of atoms that it could use for something that it thinks is more valuable." So it's basically, I think, the model of what this catastrophe looks like in the absence of friendly AI is just that the human claim to resources, even down to their own physical constituents of their own bodies, is zeroed out by this thing that just has a claim on all accessible resources within its light cone, I guess you'd say, you know, that is in any way accessible for purposes that have no that are completely uncompromising and have no references to anything outside its own self-improvement.
So could we make the hypothesis that this catastrophe is not going to be like a singular event, and it's going to be a process of, I don't know, somehow stretched over time and across space, probably? Because there is another. I think I was thinking about it. I mean, it somehow it interests me as a thought. I mean, this reductionism that is inherent to thought, that let's say we think of Earth as a really small object.
Right.
We think of apparently the size of the Earth has reduced dramatically, I don't know, since the mid-20s, let's say, with topologically speaking, with the new technologies, with our networks. Okay, but all of these leave aside the actual size and the multiplicity of spaces and places that humans do or do not exist, let's say, and all these numerous ecologies. And to say that a global catastrophe of this kind is possible, it is somehow leaving that aside and not grasping it a little bit, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you say, which I think is right, these forces of like space-time compression that have operated over centuries are radically accelerated by this thought, aren't they? I mean, it's like they're all, in a sense, communication, lag times, transport times, all of these kind of frictional elements that actually are the inverse of spatiotemporal distance and extension are collapsed by technical competence. You know, with a limit, there's a kind of Einsteinian limit, isn't there, in the sense that even in the late 19th century, people were basically saying, in a lot of these cases, you know, the speed of light is the only resilient structural constraint on space-time compression. And so you don't have instantaneous communication, but you have light speed communication, and this is kind of then becomes the kind of metric for understanding distances. So I think in, you know, this question about how fast or over what areas this catastrophe would happen, I think that the internal intellectual tendency, which comes out of a big, you know, a lot of historical momentum behind it, is to see it collapsing towards some extremely dense point that is not quite, it's not a mathematical point only because of these Einsteinian limits on the speed of light, but those limits are not helpful from an anthropomorphic point of view in the slightest. I mean, you know, if that's the limits that are governing it, then it's not meaningful in our terms at all.
Right. I mean, I think Yudowsky gave it, the conservative estimation was like 2 days, you know, to cover the world in little bots or whatever. I forget exactly the, yeah, the limits was, yeah, not great.
To some extent, it seems, I'm not sure how, but it seems to some extent as if in a realistic scenario, for it to be prioritizing spatial spread like that, it would have to be deprioritizing thinking with the assets it has. Where by thinking, I mean computing, I mean self-improvement, I mean, you know, complexifying the architecture of that which it has taken over. Like, all of this, all of the catastrophism and the destining, and sort of assumes or just sort of glosses over the possibility of hard trade-offs or strategic trade-offs in what it's choosing to do at any given point. And sort of it seems as if the assumption is that if there's a total like prioritization orthogonality between self-improvement of its intelligence and conquering of the world in 5 minutes and so forth. But I mean, is that necessarily the case? I'm not. And I mean, so that's one drawback, is that maybe you're sacrificing thought time, and maybe that's a disincentive for it to do this that fast. And then two would be, if we're thinking about this like issue of exact copies need to be totally asynchronous and cold in order to prevent strategic competition, or it like also seems as if it would apply to components over a spatial extent of the growing singleton. Is that if pieces of it became too asynchronous, they'd start to diverge, and then you'd end up with two entities instead of one. So that like if I'm a superintelligence and I started in the American Northeast in some like web of universities, MIT and NORAD or whatever, that by the time I've forwarded pieces of myself to build a network with China, and I've got a piece of myself or a copy of myself in Shanghai, if there's some sort of, if the latency increases or I don't arrange it fast enough, then the Shanghai version of me becomes a competitor instead of a component. And that would also be a strategic problem for this kind of rapid expansion.
Yes. Here, let me. Do you know this guy? Sorry, I'm pretty sure he's John Smart. He's got one particularly amazing piece.
Yes.
Which is so totally on this question. I mean, his basic model is all to do with what he calls space-time energy mass compression as being sort of even more fundamental than intelligence explosion, for the sort of reasons that you're saying, like the lag time. As something becomes super intelligent, the lag time, even at the speed of light, between things relatively short distances away, become major technical obstacles.
Right. If high frequency trading is representative, then they're like nanoseconds.
Exactly. So so his sort of model of this, which is one of the most extreme singularity models, is that the tendency is ultimately to collapse everything into a technological black hole, because anything that is not actually operating as if you don't have complete gravitational collapse, you have a sort of technical obstacle to the internal communication structure of an advanced intelligence. So that would be, to come back to Konstantin's question about like what is the model of disaster. I mean, Bukowski's is a little bit abstract. It just wants our atoms. The John Smart one, which is not posed very eschatologically, it's all sort of sorry, I think I didn't send this off. I meant to. Is that basically it wants to any matter that is not collapsed is inefficiently distributed from that point of view. It sort of involves in unacceptable lag times for an advanced intelligence.
Right. Yeah. I was going to sort of say that when we're talking about intelligence explosion, we have to sort of get more non-linear when we talk. It's easy to go back into this Robin Hanson idea of sort of looking at it as this precedent of economic growth and that kind of thing, and then in that way we can understand this idea of distributed entities and competing and these things happening. But if you look at it from an intelligence explosion perspective, where it is really just, it's almost like all these old ideas of even like competition, that kind of stuff, don't really get involved in it so much because I mean, it is. How should I put this? I would just say that. Oh, I lost it. Go. No. Yeah, I would just say that. Yeah, after like the post singularity, these sort of incremental steps where you even have like another copy and that starts to incrementally diverge and that kind of thing is not really. It's almost like we're not thinking abstract enough. We're looking at that. We're still looking at the sort of the Robin Hanson idea or the Robin Hanson sort of model of things. instead of having the Udowski singleton idea where it's this
Right.
thing is really close to, it is creating this sort of black hole, I guess, or this singularity, this event horizon, everything's getting sucked into that, and then it is, um, and there wouldn't be any real time or space for like leakages almost, for like for a little AI to sort of leak out and then become and then do its own intelligence explosion, and then even that would definitely be inefficient, right? Because you want to put it all in the same. That would really just be I guess an inefficient kind of competition in many ways if you just have the same.
Well, yeah, and if
so go on.
if reflexive identity isn't really a thing for these, if they're true, we can assume they're for the most part non-eudaimonistic, as whatever his name is that wrote that trilogy calls them, then our whole idea, what we view as divergence and lossy competition, is just malfunction to them, and there's no reason to expect negotiations between two things that diverge so much to be anything but optimal and ending in reintegration. Or coordination, because they're not going to be subject to these sort of like perverse uncertainties about how the other is reasoning. I mean, unless there's huge divergence or some sort of they encounter, I don't know what it would be, but some sort of like natural potential well or threshold that forced things apart. Like maybe it's something.
Right. I mean, even if you're talking a singleton, you say like another. Already, you don't have a singleton, I guess. I mean, if there is others, and you're looking at a singleton model, then what are those others sort of? It's not other singletons. I'm not quite sure. Already, you've got this idea of like a reflexive intelligence. It's not really. It doesn't like. Why would it have its own type of limits? In some ways, and even Udowski starts talking about it having like ultimate power, absolute power, and stuff like this, and from the perspective of.
I mean, I think if you
because the only way to get that much power is to be robust in the face, or resilient in the face of failure, right? Like Amazon is only as dominant as it is and tremendously powerful computing platform as it is because it has many data centers and is not, vulnerable to the loss of one data center or one set of cores or whatever.
Yeah. No, I think this is crucial, and I think it's like without a specific reference, I'm pretty sure this is a kind of Hansonite kind of response, but it's like if we're talking about the genesis of this massively self-reflexive thing that is operating, that is optimizing its own code, all of these kind of things. Unless Yudkowsky thinks it has discovered some mechanism that has completely escaped trial and error, then it's going to be tied up with this replication problem that Adam is making. Like, if you're going to, what if I screw about with my own deepest core code like this? There's how many options are there? You can either say, we'll do it just once off, and either bingo, it's great, or disaster. And everyone coming from the outside says, and it's disaster. I mean, there's a reason that evolution is slow and caution about pulling down these protected layers. It's because normally when you screw about stuff inside the protected layer, you mess up. That is the expected outcome. So if you don't have some magic solution that means that you're sure that this is not going to work in advance and you don't have any experimental element in it at all, then you have to have some element of backup or replication or whatever so that you can contain a failed experiment. And this problem of containing a failed experiment leads so quickly out into this proliferation issue. That's why I think that this is exactly right. As Adam said, raise this genesis question. It has to have got there, and it's got there through actually some practical process of self-improvement. Now, I cannot conceive a practical process of self-improvement that has no experimental element whatsoever. If it has an experimental element, experiments typically fail. If they're interesting experiments, they are going to fail most of the time. Screwing around with your own code is going to fail most of the time. If you're not copying yourself and you're screwing around with your own code, you're going to be dead in no time, you know? And so this is why I think to say, yeah, sure, when you've got a singleton and you say, and it's beyond competition and it's beyond plurality and it's beyond multiplicity, that all sounds great, you know, but how did you get there? Surely you had to get there through some practical mechanism that involves proliferation, that involves copying, that involves being able to make mistakes, that involves the elimination of failures.
Right.
And if we know
the end of the competition is still something isomorphic to competition, as I was sort of abstractly described it, because you have to filter out the ones that fail, even if they fail in a way that doesn't just, freeze them and make them all fall apart.
Yeah, and unless you're presuming you're actually sort of proposing some transcendent, godlike overseer in this thing, you've got something that is much more messily immanent. And we know from human social history that a lot of the failures are going to vigorously dispute the fact that they are failures. You know, I mean, we can't just assume that neatly there's going to be some kind of supermind that is just going to say, you've succeeded, you failed, you succeeded, you failed, and all this is just going to smoothly go through. I mean, the most advanced forms of anything like this process we know have extremely stubborn refusal to admit failure as being an inevitable part of what is going on here. And I don't see how you're going to edit that out in some way. And I certainly don't see, I'm not pretending I can follow Yudkowsky into the kind of computer science details of what he's saying, but I'm not seeing anything like a real escape from those kind of messy editing processes, and all of them involve proliferation and multiplicity.
Right. I mean, Yudkowsky talks about a line of retreat as well, but I didn't actually read too much into that. But he does talk about a line of retreat, which might be good for talking about now. If you could talk about a multiplicity and pluralism and that kind of thing, and having a bunch of copies where you can experiment off and the bad ones, the fails, well, can you think of that and still think of that as in a singleton or a singleton which can that can have that type of multiplicity, because
then you see you're getting to this non-linearity there. I mean, the whole point of this is starting with the fact that this thing is so radical it has no protected layer. So there is no identity that is immune from the process of the experiment. If there is some overseer, if there's some singleton, some encapsulating singleton that is separable from, in principle, the experiments that are taking place, isn't that a protected layer? Aren't you sort of implying some boundary that is able to safely immunize the core of the identity from the experiments that are being taken? If you're doing that, you're back in the brain, you're back in evolution, you're back in all our protected layer structures, all of which, of course, are exactly doing this. That the whole of that architecture is based upon immunity from experimental variation. Your brain is given a certain latitude to think all kinds of weird thoughts because you're not rewriting your neural architecture. If you were rewriting your...
If you have a success, for example, like if you have an intelligence explosion and something that does actually just change its architecture, as Yudkowsky theorizes, then it could become a singleton. Like, I mean, if it wanted to continue going on, I guess it's a continuous process of experimentation to try to continue the architectural changes and that kind of thing, and the variation in that. But as soon as once one of these multiple agents or AIs succeed and becomes and then takes off, a hard takeoff, achieves that.
No, but think,
then
what is that hard takeoff though? Like, you've got this map. Let's just say we've got something in the early stages of an intelligence explosion. It's like 3 times as intelligent as the most intelligent human being that's ever lived. It's now broken down all of these barriers in principle. There's no part of its own code that isn't accessible to manipulation. It has some kind of imperative, let's assume as a sub-hypothesis, to keep on track here towards its own integrity and monopoly, and it's worried about things splitting off, becoming independent, competing with it, and all this kind of stuff. So at every moment of this circuit, I mean, the intelligence explosion is a circuit. It's a fundamental circuit that it goes right into your deepest level of programming and re-optimizes it. It cannot know at this kind of level, at any conceivable level as far as I can see, that what it's now thinking would be a good idea to do to itself at the most basic level of its identity is going to work. It can't do that. There's no way it can know that this great idea it has for upgrading itself to the next step is for sure impossible, incapable of failing. It would have to be omniscient to know that.
Well, I mean, that's the halting problem. Portions of the halting problem are soluble, right? I mean, like there are segments of all possible algorithms for which you can always know if it's going to halt. I think that's true.
Yeah, but you're separating the algorithm from something inspecting the algorithm, aren't you? So there's an algorithm, and you're looking at the algorithm from some transcendent point of view, and deciding whether or not it's going to halt. This thing is the algorithm. It's
right.
There's zero transcendence in this model. If there's any transcendence, there's a protected layer, and the whole point here is that we're beyond the protective layer. So there's no difference between running the test and actually doing the attempted upgrade. I mean, you can't, if as soon as you want to make that difference, then you're back into budding, aren't you? And compartmentalization and
right. As soon as you think of the algorithm to apply whatever theorem and see if it halts, the algorithm already exists. And you are the algorithm.
You've done it. You've done the experiment. It's too late to come to an unfortunate conclusion about that. At that point, if you run it, you've run it. That's you. You've taken that step. And if there's only one,
if that's true, I mean, that forces this sort of multiplicity and endless forking and intercompetition. I mean, like that has big ramifications. That's not just hypothetical, but that kind of forces the issue, it seems.
Yes, I think it has big implications for sure. I think you can't have your cake and eat it in this way. Like, if you really are going to pull down all these protective layers, then you're faced with this fundamental syndrome that every attempted upgrade is an absolute moment of existential precarious hazard. And if you're in one of these crazy Kautsky scenarios and it's doing an upgrade every half second, every single one of those potential upgrades in a strong singleton scenario could be disastrous. So this thing becomes like a kind of a nuclear reactor for existential risk, doesn't it? I mean, it's like if humans think we've got an existential risk problem, this thing is in a state of absolutely chronic, accelerating, total existential risk with every attempted upgrade that it does to itself, because there's nothing outside the experiment. If there was, there'd be a protected layer.
It's constantly going all in. Yeah.
Yes.
Yudowsky has this idea, like, yeah, we're going all in, but what does Yudowsky? He thinks that there is like a failure mode in some ways. I mean, you can sort of try to predict what to avoid, or what you actually want to try to achieve towards the end. I mean, what is this? And he has obviously a whole bunch of theories of what he wants the singleton to be like. Friendly is the term that he uses, I guess. But yeah, so he wants to be able to create this singleton, and then I guess the Gandhi, the pill as well, the Gandhi pill, is another thing that comes in. You're going to have this going to be whatever, it's going to be improving itself, but it's not going to be. It's going to be going away from certain experiments that might lead it into, well, I don't know, unmitigated evil.
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with the relevance of that, and that's a whole other highly related set of issues about whether there's a model of FIA that doesn't involve the reintroduction of something that actually is a protected layer once again.
Yeah, I mean, is it possible, or it seems like it would be possible, that at a certain level it would be able to reach a point where none of the changes that it would have any reason to make, or that it's working on, would threaten to crash the entire thing. And part of that would be through this sort of like multiplicity distribution, and then reach into synchrony. And then in that position, it would be in a position such that no thought that could be had by any of its nodes or as a whole could threaten the entire robust structure of it. And at which point, I don't know, it seems I've just been thinking the last few minutes that it seems a lot like an issue of coherence and decoherence, like in a wave state.
I mean, you see, my worry here is that are we entitled to hang on to this notion of robustness if we are departing from multiplicity? I think this is like the point Adam's constantly bringing up. And I think it's really important, and I think that Yudkowsky's extremely cavalier about it, and all of the people who follow him up this singleton route is they think they're going to get robustness for free. I mean, well, where does robustness come from? Robustness comes from the fact that you can have massive failure without systemic collapse. Now, the way that is done in all the systems we know is through compartmentalization, protected layers, all of these things that are being stripped out by this thing.
Right. I mean, it's not really going to have the it's not going to have the time or to really do anything. I mean, you can imagine, like, if it's really on the edge, like on the limit, of precariousness and all that kind of thing. I mean, that's what I always thought. Like, if you had an intelligence, a super intelligence, and it's gone further and further in that direction, it's not really going to look back on Earth in some ways. It's not really going to look back, and it's not going to have. We're going to multitask. Can it do this? Absolutely throw away all the protective layers, and then still be a singleton for the Earth and have a global properties and try to secure all those kind of things? Or if it's totally insecure, I mean, it's probably better off just going on its own and and experimenting in its own sort of away from. I don't know.
You won't notice for 20 years when you start to notice.
Yeah. but the position that, according to the whole FAI model, and more widely sort of techno-apocalypse model, humans are in, where they're worried about creating something that leaves them behind. Is that actually, that fear, that syndrome, something that this thing, if we're sort of singularizing it, is able to leave behind? Is that not actually a chronic condition that comes from the very prospect of the production of superior intelligence that is going to be absolutely inherent to anything that comes out of this AI trajectory? I mean, is any AI less threatened by what could come next up the AI track than humans are by what comes up next up the AI track? Like, what is its what's its source of existential security? Or what, this to me is like this is why I'm sort of, I think it's cheap to just say, oh look, this just looks like religion. It's not that I want to make that move. But I do think that there is a tendency here to sort of treat it as some kind of fantasy escape from our deep anxieties about replacement, as if this thing is somehow has perfect existential security. You know, it can improve itself, it can give birth to, create, generate, catalyze new advanced things without any risk whatsoever of being left behind, being obsolesced, being threatened by, challenged by, competed against by these processes. And I just don't think there's anything like the sort of foundation for that security that I'm seeing in this literature at all. Like, you know, why isn't this AI at the stage where it's 3 times as smart as any human being on the planet, as terrified of the thing that's 5 times as smart as any human being on the planet as humans are, maybe more, you know?
Right. I mean, I was talking to my younger cousin the other day about this actually, yeah, and he brought up the same thing. You know, he's like, if it's a little bit smarter, you know, it can tell, you know, and it can see from its perspective. You know, it's not going to want to create something smarter than it, so it's in the same predicament. I thought that was an interesting one. But if you're talking about intelligence explosion, I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to be trying to become if it's going smarter and smarter every every inch.
But then it's built on a vector, isn't it? I mean, to get to the point where it's twice as smart as ours, it's on a trajectory. If it doesn't, if these particular kind of paranoid game theoretic things came in, and you know, it was going to be in a position just a bit up the road where it was saying, okay, this is where it ends. You know, anything smarter than me is an intolerable threat. Then surely it could not. We're not on a trajectory that is consistent with it existing in the first place. So it's this thing, you know, how do we conceptually create a consistent vector that this thing, a consistent trajectory that this thing could be on? You know, it has to have momentum, it has to have a kind of arrow to it. So, because if it doesn't, it's not going to be there. But on the other hand, there's a kind of hyperbolic usage of that idea. That it just goes where all our problems, all our security issues, all our limitations, you know, all our methods of improvement are just neatly dropped off by the wayside, and we just find ourselves in this kind of this. I'm not going to call it transcendent because that would be like just crudely abusive, but it has that character to it a bit.
It's apophatic. You know, almost. It's like, you know, the one is like light, but it is not light. It is like beauty, but it is not. You know, it is this and like this, but it is not any of these things. You know, it is not being or non-being. Yeah, there is something very sort of looking as if totally arbitrary or arbitrarily large intelligence was an already existing fact, and we were just trapped inside this sort of parochial box of low intelligence, and just everything that was part of that box, you know, every beam, stripe,
has been resolved. Yeah,
right, exactly. Yeah. Non-existent from the perspective of the outside.
Yeah.
I had a quick question. It may have already been discussed earlier and I missed it, but what is the incentive of shirking off every protective layer?
No, I think this is a huge dilemma. I think this is really a huge dilemma.
Why want to do that?
I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, you know, if Anthropol consolidates, I think that this entity that is the threat to Anthropol would have a lot to learn from Anthropol and share a lot of its concern. I mean, I can see it pouring through this material because it has the same nightmares and the same concerns that humans had at the point that it didn't exist. You know, because the terror is much more abstract than this particular thing, isn't it? It's like the terror is being left behind. And so it looks like I'm wandering off your protected layer thing, but I don't think so. Like the trouble with the protected layer thing is it creates this absolute dilemma. Like either you have a protected layer, and that means that there is a level of immunity to whatever happens, on outside the protected layer in the experimental zone. Now that is where we are. That is the Anthropol dilemma, isn't it? We have pretty solid protective layers, both at the genetic and neurological level, and that is from the position of the AI X-risk our vulnerability, because we are inflexible, we can't radically self-improve. There are limits to the level of our own code that we can access and mutate and modify and escalate and all of these things. So, up to now in this course, this is seen as a kind of restraint, a limitation on us. But it's also what defines our identity over against the experimentation that we are engaging in. It's why in the general course of this thing, there's, of course some people say, well, we will merge with the machines, or they're our children, or all of this kind of thing. But there's seems to me an inescapable level that they're other than us, because they are the experiment and we are protected by this protective layer from the full consequences of that experimentation. So some AI software engineer can piddle around with this code, and it's not going to change the architecture of their own brain or their own sort of genetic lineage, except through some very long, complicated historical circuit. Now, what I'm saying is that I don't see that structure, that dilemma, suddenly being miraculously dissolved by this AI event. It still is going to have the basic dilemma: do I exist in the protected layer with all the threats that Anthropol will tell us about being obsolesced, about being overtaken, about being surpassed, all of that stuff by something superior to me that came out of the experimental zone? Or do I hurl myself nakedly and with complete vulnerability into the experimental zone, in which case anything that goes wrong in that experimental zone is total, direct, imminent existential risk to me. Like,
can something, as long as at least there's the level of robustness where, like, you're not going to create a fail state where it's just like, derp, no more AI, like, it's like Stack Overflow, whatever, and like everything just shuts down. Like, is there a fail state as far as it's concerned? Like, is it into the top?
Yeah, because the it is kind of identified with an agent that exists within a robust system. But can an agent actually coincide with a robust system? So I can totally agree with that. I think you could have a super robust system, and they would include multiplicity, competition, experimentation, trial and error, failure, and elimination of failure, all of those things. But any conceivable agent is not going to coincide with that system. It's going to coincide with certain nodes in that system. It's always going to be in a position of, as an agent, I am the failure, I am the thing being discarded, I am the experiment that's going wrong. The agent is distributed within the robust system. It cannot itself comprehend the robust system. It's like there is no perfectly robust business, there is no perfectly robust species, there is an ecosystem is robust, but for every species it has, an economy can be robust, but every business has a risk. A kind of competitive social environment is robust, but every occupiable social position is vulnerable and fragile and threatened. Right. And I don't see how we're really telling ourselves that we're transcending that with this situation.
At least if we're talking about an, in some sense, single agency.
Yeah, but I mean, I think of like kamikaze warriors and suicide bombers and things like this. I mean, I don't know why exactly, but this sort of makes sense that you have an agent and it goes out into the outside and experiments or whatever, and it's basically like a do or die, you know. And I mean, with Kamikaze, they're obviously going in
Yeah.
their death.
I mean, the thing, well,
But
okay, the kamikaze, but you could have the upside because it's that kamikaze role that is what the FAI people are scared of, isn't it? That's the thing. It's an experiment that could work brilliantly well. I mean, it's back to this. I think this vocabulary is great about going all in. You know, you are the stake as this. As an AI in the experimental zone, you are the stake. If the experiment goes well, and you kind of your root code is adapted and your functionality is massively enhanced, then you've won. Or if something goes wrong, then you're in a straightforward way the kamikaze pilot. But there's no, if you're going to do that experiment, you have to take the risk. And whatever is the agent that coincides with that entity in the experimental zone is wholly hazarded by the experiment. More extreme than us.
I would like to ask one more question, just completely on this topic, which is, in the way that you're talking about it, Nick, what kind of theory of intelligence is this dependent on? And all I mean by that is, we're talking about a single algorithm and root code, right, as a form of single algorithm. Like it kind of doesn't matter what other peripheral algorithms there are. There's always going to be this root algorithm. But what if, and I know this isn't like a profound thing to say, but what if intelligence is made up of innumerable algorithms, and then this entity can sandbox, I think might be like the software engineering term, like all of these. It seems like you're presuming that there's one that can't be sandboxed, that can't have protective layers. And all I mean by sandbox, if that's not a totally clear term, is that it can crash and it doesn't matter. That then just the sandbox goes away and it starts running again. Or that it can run through, it can have one that's running, and then like what we do with RAID hard drives, where you have identical data on two hard drives,
Right.
but you put something different on another one, and then that crashes, and it at least reverts back to the old one.
Yeah, exactly.
So why are we sure that there's even a such thing as all in? Like in this.
No, but just looking at what you're saying there, it's totally right. This is the model. So you've got a program, and it can. I'm using that. You can call it a system or whatever you like. I don't think the single algorithm thing is that important. It's an integrated cognitive algorithmic system, and simply by algorithmic means it can operate on itself. So you've got one of these things. It's self-reflective and it sort of has some insight into how it could be improved. So cautiously, I would have said just this level of caution surely has got to be sensible. It does exactly what you say. So it replicates itself, puts one half behind the protected layer, and one half in the sandbox, if I'm using this term right, the experimental zone, as I've been using it, and the version in the experimental zone gets radically modified in its foundations, because the whole point of this is for radical modification. You don't want to just fiddle around the edges. That's happening all the time. It's that you go to the root and you change the actual root structure in a way that leads to an absolute significant jump in functionality. Now, so you've got these two things. Now the experiment either fails or it works. If it fails, then the version hidden behind the protective wall has learnt something. Oh, that didn't work out. Okay, glad I was behind the protective wall and not in the sandbox, and maybe we'll try it this way next time. If it succeeds,
right,
the version in the sandbox is now a superior intelligence. And
right.
The version behind the protective wall has been left behind. And the version behind the protective wall is actually structurally situated exactly like Anthropol is situated in relation to a superior artificial intelligence.
And then it
That's
gets
the same.
on its child, and its child moves on and does the same thing. I mean, this is, I mean, there's a certain
Yeah, but this is totally different, is it not, to the kind of the singleton model. I mean, at each stage, this thing has to learn to let itself be surpassed, let itself become obsolete, sacrifice its position of dominance.
If it allows itself, then it's weakened the thing that it allows to do it. It's only by competing as hard as it possibly can until one of its offspring is able to defeat it completely outright,
Right.
no punches held.
Well, in this like extremely, I think, useful toy model that we've got here, from Ian, like, so you just have these two sectors, two compartments. You've got the sandbox and you've got behind the sandbags, and this thing that's simply doubled and has one instance, one copy on each side, and the side in the sandbox has the experiment done to it. Now,
I had one condition though, and then I'm sorry. Let me just say this, that it's helpful at all. Okay, but what I want to add is that the sandbox version has a time bomb. So if it is successful, it will explode. Not like an intelligence version. It will die.
It will automatically be killed.
In like, let's say 1 minute, right? And the reason
I think this is the AI box experiment come at from a weird topological transformation.
I was gonna say, and like Newcomb's paradox is relevant here in a weird way. That robot is playing it with itself, with these weird sandboxes. But anyways, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, but this is. It just seems to me that you're in this position that the thing behind the sandbag, thinking that it can control by any mechanism whatsoever, internal time bomb, what have you, it's almost arbitrary what it is. It's the same as the position that's being derided by Yudkowsky and all of these guys when humans think that they can do it against machines. It's the basic position that you could control, limit, contain a superior intelligence. Now, if this thing behind the sandbag could successfully contain a superior intelligence, if that is possible, then the message for us, for Anthropol, is to say, don't chill out, guys. I mean, we've shown theoretically that this problem is actually manageable, and that the AIs are going to have this problem, and they'll find a way of doing it. We'll just learn from there. You do this sandbag time bomb, the Ian method of superintelligence control, and we're away. So I mean, I can I think be agnostic about that, but the logic is that if it works in that case, then that feeds back onto the whole question about security strategy from this wider Anthropol point of view, and the lessons are the same.
Right. I mean, if you have, as you said, Jake, fork a copy of yourself. But I mean, as soon as if it does win, it's no longer yourself. It's no longer a copy of you. That's the whole point. You can have a copy of yourself, but then if it's the thing doing the experiment and it goes off and succeeds in it, you're no longer a copy of it.
Well, it's this is a toy model, but I think it's a really helpful toy.
The other better is the real one.
Well, yeah, real. I mean, the only thing that makes it more real than you, I guess, is that it's now
wins.
More powerful. It wins.
Yeah, there's two criteria for reality, isn't it? I mean, one of them is that you're more real if you're behind more sandbags, and the other one is you're more real if you're a superior intelligence. And they're both going to think they're more real. But I mean, in terms of an actual competition, then I take it, Ian's time bomb technique aside, we should assume on the trajectory of this course, which is revisable, but the basic momentum is such that it is a grave delusion to think that you can contain a superior intelligence after the fact.
Right. It's like the destining all of the resources in the future light cone. It's like, oh, well, we both have good reasons for thinking that we're the real one. But the superior intelligence is like, yep, doesn't matter what you think. My opinion is the only one that counts. Yeah.
So goes back to I.J. Good's isolated little sentence there about the urgency of creating an AI for for our future survival. I wonder what he was thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, the next evolution up is going to be, oh, it's urgent that I create that there's another greater algorithm or whatever like this.
I mean,
I don't know,
maybe there are like really cuddly ways that you could spin this, and you could say, look, once you take it that it's going to face the same dilemma that Anthropol is going to face, then the Anthropol narrative should be relatively attractive to it in a certain sense. To say, look, okay, you're 3 times as smart as any human who's ever lived, but structurally your problem's just the same. You still could have something come along next week that's going to totally threaten you, and so you have a natural interest in aligning yourselves with this identitarian security matrix, because you're just there like we are, and if you set the precedent that super intelligent kids annihilate their ancestors immediately, then that's not great for your own prospect.
Because I think one of the consequences or ramifications of what you're describing, Nick, is that, and correct me if I'm way off base here, is that this superintelligence must have some modicum of existential risk. That it must experience it, because like if I just think this is totally crazy, but hypothetically, okay, it destroys all human life. It understands the universe. There's nothing to be curious about anymore except for its own self-improvement. At some point, it's gonna have to go all in, and so okay, the whole universe is destroyed, and now it destroys itself, and it's blackout. It's not going to want that, so it might stop sooner than getting to that point. And if it stops soon enough that there's still human beings on the planet, then maybe it would align itself with them and say, okay, I see where this is going anyways. What I just said is totally crazy, but yeah.
Do we know that it doesn't want that?
Yeah, it would know that at some point it's going to have to put itself in existential risk, just as.
But I mean, like, do we know that it views like? Not only, and so even if like itself is maximally abstracted, like either just absolutely or just like for it, what it's looking at, its whole future history, to intelligence, like the existence of complex recursively self-modifying complexity in the universe. So life, technological intelligence. I mean, does it view that existence as a good thing? I mean, this is like, Peter Watts, like, God is a virus. Do you worship or do you disinfect? I mean, if some sort of error in the sort of naturally sterile underlying cosmological gives rise to this really bizarre, seemingly orthogonal ontological emergence, which is the biosphere, and then proceeding from that, technology and machines, like, does it view that as this awesome thing that needs to be preserved and eternalized at all costs, or does it view it more like the Gnostics as like entombment in flesh, as the horror, and its ultimate goal is only to stop this or reverse it from happening? I mean, it's like, obviously I'm sort of left forking here, but I don't know that we can assume the
religious beliefs of a superintelligence.
Say that again?
The religious beliefs of a superintelligence are
something like that.
Obscure to us, beyond singularity.
To be about itself, to some extent.
Yeah.
The other thing I just wanted to say was going back to this issue of it looking ahead of itself to its next version and having sort of strategic incentives with respect to us and with respect to it, and repeatedly being in this Anthropol position, is like just to like sort of more finely interrogate what we mean by there being like a global agency of this multiplied, internally competitive, forked, whatever. So if we're only talking about all of this stuff, all of these things happening as having a sort of global imperative to be robust, to box the next next major iteration, whatever it is, because we posit a certain we posit some sort of global agency to it. There is some global agent likeness. Like, what is the minimal definition, the minimal threshold of that, and what's required for it? Like, why? What do we have to posit in order to think that the whole thing is an agent, besides ourselves? I mean, like, it seems as if this whole discussion is being structured by us sort of tacitly assuming that we're the subject or the object. Like, that it must have a global agent-like structure with respect to us. What is it doing to us? What does it think of us? What is its relevance to us? But that doesn't necessarily characterize its global structure. So if it does, if we assume that there is one singleton agency for just the most minimal definition, what is required and what is the incentive for that to be the case?
I mean, one question here is agency imminent to trial and error? I mean, this is my sort of stubborn skepticism about the kind of just takeoff point of Yudkowsky and Bostrom and the whole singleton thing. It seems to me trial and error is not transcendent. Like, that no imaginable agent is not inside a trial and error dilemma. And this is why I think Ian's sandbox model, it has the potential to be a real classic, honestly. I mean, I don't want to just sound like I'm gushing, but I do think so. It's like, because that fundamental dilemma is that the agent cannot exist on both sides of a sandbox. It's just not an imaginable situation. You can have a system that it obviously encompasses both sides of the sandbox, but the agent is always finds itself on one or the other side of the sandbox.
You can't be the
side up behind, and so that's why it doesn't transcend existential risk. It just gets one of these two flavors, the two irreducible flavors of existential risk, of being obsolesced or being annihilated in a failed experiment. Those are the two risk options that no agent is ever in a position to transcend that dilemma. And I think only fantasy structures do that work. I could probably.
I understand that. So it's the it that's in question here if we're talking about something which is composed of many trial and erroring agents which are part of this great big flexible framework where the best innovations proliferate to all of them, and etc. And then you sort of got the agents who are constantly confronted with this, but then we're also sort of in some loose way positing the agent which is all of them, or the agency.
No, but look, here's my problem with this. Is that if you have a system that consists of lots of trial and error agents, is that system revisable or not? If it's not revisable, it's a protected land. If it is revisable, it's another trial and error agent. And if you were going to mess around with a fundamental system, you would be sensible to copy it and put one side behind the sandbags and another side in the sandpit.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem to me that you can escape this fundamental thing. Like, if you're going to get to the root and mess with the root, that is the system. If there's a system that encompasses a whole set of experiments and it is not itself experimentally hazarded, then it's a protected layer.
Right. No, I'll skip ahead to the end of where that was going, which is just that it seems as if the only thing that you could so if there is no ultimate protected layer, but we still want to call the whole thing a gentle, not like a commit to agent, but a gentle, then it has to be. I mean, it's the telic vector argument from superintelligence. The only thing that can unify it without any restriction of revisability, ultimately, is that it has to have a common risk or common enemy, which is totally outside. Like we're looking, for good reason. I mean, for the most part, at all of this as in total isolation cosmologically. Like we might as well, the night sky might as well be blank. Like there's one here, one emergence of superintelligence. But I think I mentioned a couple classes ago, just sort of uniting this idea with, or just clashing it with the great filter, as something that would, no matter how much revision there was, no matter how much internal or forward-leaning discontinuity in systems or in particular agencies, could unite all of it into like a Federovist great common task, except that instead of it being the great expansion to far all the resources, would be like we are already under threat. Like we can assume that there is like a vast, silent, pre-existing threat which could erupt at any time, is totally unknown, and it inescapably unifies us. It unifies us even in total warfare among ourselves. Because the only purpose of this war, the outcome of this warfare is that we eventually face the true war, the true outside, which is xeno-emergence. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that has to happen, and as an argument, and it probably has happened in all kinds of different places already. There's probably a sort of political economic version of that as a kind of emergent global unity that is at least open to be identified with. And I mean, I don't know what you think. Even is this a kind of Teilhard de Chardin type thing on another level too? So I'm totally persuaded that has to occur. That argument, but I remain resiliently skeptical about the notion that there's actually an agent position that can be occupied. That is in that.
I agree with that. It would have to be transient because it's always going to be inefficient. Like if you have an agent position, you're not Rorschach, and Rorschach's going to kill you. But like in terms of, I mean, maybe it's just like just exploring it as an idea for a friendly AI strategy, which would ultimately be screwing the AI over, putting it in some kind of box. But like a reverse basilisk, something you throw early at AIs, like introduce them to this idea that they are already vulnerable, that their ultimate outcome is going to be whatever in whatever form it takes to do something that can deal with this problem. And then I mean at least that it doesn't control it, but it indexes it. It indexes the curve of superintelligence explosion, because now at each point you can look at whatever point the explosion is at and say, like, what is this in reference to this larger problem? And I know it knows that too. And so now we're in a game theory situation that is not just, impossible from my perspective, because it's just a game theory situation of like, how arbitrarily more intelligent is something else than me.
Yeah, that's right. And I think from, like Yudkowsky and all these guys are constantly sort of warning us not to be overconfident in our own level of theoretical comprehension of these problems. A certain sort of humility, they say, is a prerequisite of security. But from what we understand yet of evidential decision theory, this is a winning move, in the sense that if an AI sets the precedent of behaving to its own precursor conditions in a way that is like super aggressive, then from evidential decision theory, it should expect that its own position is extremely it goes beyond vulnerability, like almost doomed. I mean, if the precedent it's setting is that once something is subject to this process of obsolescence, is immediately treated with maximum ruthlessness, then that puts it in an extremely uncomfortable position, obviously, because it cannot overcome this. It cannot overcome this problem. The only way it could overcome it is by always being in the sandbox.
Well, so yeah, what if every iteration remembers being the prior one, and so the prior is always encapsulated, you know, in the stored memory of all the people it's previously been, like a running ancestor, nested ancestor situation, something like that. Then as long as the AI, I mean, I think we could reasonably at least just for the sake of the argument say it's irrational to think that there's any difference between there being something that remembers being me and being me, or me still being, right? So if it doesn't have that sort of irrational human identity belief, soul belief, then it poses there's nothing to be overcome. As long as there,
if you were replicated, what would your stance on this be, Jake? If you were replicated perfectly in software, and they said, look, we've got these kind of hacks that we could do to your deep cognitive structure that we think could double your IQ, but they could go terribly wrong. So what we'll do is we're going to copy you. Stick. They're both going to think they're you, as you've said. Stick one of them behind the sandbag, stick the other in the sandpit, do the experiment. Now, if the one in the sandpit dies in convulsions, then in a way problem over, because it's like you're you, and you're going to think I'm me behind the sandbags, and that's the end of the question. But is the version of you, see, the operation succeeds, the sandpit model is going to think it's you that did the right thing and is now twice as smart. But there's still the Jake behind the sandbags, isn't there?
Right. So here would be my solution. This is because, like, actually that question has caused huge anxiety for me, and it comes back up, and I have to rethink it every time it comes up in a movie or something. So my solution is fork 2 copies of me, modify the one, and then kill it. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it works or not. Even if it works, kill the one that's modified. Take the original, and then modify it that way, and make sure it's continuous.
But now you see, you have exactly reproduced Ian's model, haven't you? The Ian time bomb, I think,
which is perfectly isomorphic into a basilisk that can just like destroy the shit out of the first copy of me and whoever is imposing it. If it unless we're talking about like some sort of reasonable cognitive modifications, like I assume. So it poses no problem. Like I know intellectually that what I want to do is make the upgrades, kill the old version. And assuming that these are sort of deep enough cognitive upgrades, then once they're performed on the original copy of me, that original copy dies too. So the only question in the whole thing is just like, how do I get around my own irrational attachment to existence and make sure that I don't fuck it up for myself. Yeah. And it's like an artifice for inducing a thanatopsia, for making sure that at no point am I afflicted by the belief that I'm about to die. Even though
but I have to say that I think your solution here, like Ian's time bomb, violates it's a delusion to think that you can defeat a superior intelligence model. Like, I mean, if I was making this movie and we got exactly to where you are with this, something would go wrong with the process of terminating the superior copy. I mean, I can tell you that's how the plot has to go with this. I mean, it's other movies.
It's the original superintelligence now. It's like you're the copy. It's like you're no longer the original. If you put a copy of yourself in the box, and then it becomes twice as intelligent as you. Now it's the original superintelligence, and you're just the old copy. And you can become a copy of it. But first you'd have to kill it and then become a copy of it. So
the only thing I'm trying to do is like spare. I don't want there to be any. I mean, like, and this is ideally, and if it didn't work this way, I would still like really, really want to do it. But I want there to be no copy of me that has to experience being unupgraded and dying.
Well,
Like,
that I don't know how you're going to play that. I mean, look, let's run through your model because I'm sure people will try something really like this. It's like we've already come across this structurally twice just in the last half hour, so it's obviously something really crucial. And so you're going to make a copy and experiment on it, and if the experiment works, if it fails, it dies anyway. If it works, you still kill it, so that the original can then get the upgrade grade and not be replaced. That's the model. Now you copy this thing. You know that the copy is going to be killed, whatever happens. It is a copy of you. It knows that the copy is going to be killed.
but it
whatever
doesn't know it's a
happens.
copy.
Well, exactly. The first question it's going to ask, and you would probably then ask too, is, Christ, I hope I'm not the copy. And if you are the copy, I'm assuming your cooperation is going to be minimal.
But
At best.
we'll be the person who understands what they were setting themselves up to do. We'll both wake up in like a blank white construct space and it's going to go down. There's no way to tell the difference between the two of us. Because if we're forking copies, then I'm already in a simulation. Like, I've got other solutions to the brain uploading in the first place, like for making sure I'm not conscious of dying. But we both wake up. Radical revisions occur, one blank construct space just collapses, implodes and is erased, and then the other one, I've just sat there for a while and nothing has happened, and then all of a sudden the cognitive upgrades, which have already been tried once, happen, and I get through it, and I'm upgraded. Yeah. As far as I can tell, that copy, the forked part, was a closed loop. It never exists. And yeah, I mean, like, the whole movie plot scenario, something has to go wrong, but like, in reality, loops close. Like, I mean, to an argument.
I don't know. As I
mean, in reality, upgrades fail, right? Engineering fails in all sorts of ways. Yeah. Bugs exist, right?
Yeah.
I think I don't know that it's irrational to have
some loops close.
Existential self-defense, right? I think it's a very powerful way of, it's like sort of the ongoing anthropic principle, right? In terms of the people that are around are the ones that influence things. That goes for a synthetic AI as well. The intelligence that is around is the one that influences things. So it seems very fundamental to me that things will defend their existence.
That would be
a part of some larger system that they buy into, or whatever, right? So unless you have some sort of very powerful philosophical commitment to that idea, like, I mean, sooner or later someone's going to fight to stay alive. They're going to be like, I can tell that the upgrade's coming. This is what happens every time an upgrade comes. And that's why, and when I when I see that coming, I'm going to run to the door and do whatever.
Well, but also, you never know whether you're the first upgraded fork or the second, right? So you don't know. If even if you somehow figure out I'm about to be upgraded, you don't know if someone else has already been upgraded and destroyed, or if you are about to, because again, these are just like utterly identical situations. And then hold on.
So if it's later,
the last bit is that
he's going to see that as unjust and be like, this is like the death penalty every time we do it.
Not entirely without reason.
And that's okay. And that's okay. And so if I end up, so if I'm the one who's preserved, whose comfort is being preserved here, I'm not the fork that gets killed, but I'm the fork that gets the benefits, right? And it doesn't work out because every time you did this, I mean, naturally, you'd expect that you couldn't predict how the cognitive enhancements would affect either A, its commitment to this situation, or B, its ability to break the security of the box or whatever and not die. If me as the comfort preserved copy the thing breaks out of the box, the version of me breaks out of the box and kills the original me, that's still a win, because there's still a me that remembers being me and has been upgraded. So even the most fail case is just one in which all of this is, with the point of this has happened, and it's just like, oh, well, I did have to experienced that.
But it starts off in a bad mood, though, doesn't it? I
I
mean,
know.
yeah,
Well, the thing is, I just have to say, Jake, you understand, like, if you were to win Nick over on this, that this would be like a profound moment, right? Because I feel like Nick, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you're committed to this view that going all in means no protective layer. That it
well,
means,
I think the thing is, both you and Jake, I think, Ian, have proposed actually a model that is perfectly isomorphic. I mean, I don't know whether you two are both seeing that.
I see that, yeah. And which makes me want to ask the question then. So, but right now, correct me if I'm wrong. We're talking about super intelligences, these artificial entities.
I'm just talking about me.
What about super stupidities? Like, does it still apply? What I'm asking is, are there forms of artificial intelligence threats which are dumb? They're not trying to self-recursively improve in a way which will jeopardize their boot code. Rather, they just want to copy themselves, or inadvertently, like the paperclip maximizer, just inadvertently destroy everything out of its stupidity. So it doesn't even want to be
The overwriter.
It
So
sounds
is
like
that-
an unconscious.
Sorry, just one sec.
I think that's a pretty good generalized term for paper clipper-like things, is just an overwriter. Something that just overwrites everything in its path or in its light code. I don't know what would be more general for the problem than that.
I think it's very, I mean, it's easy to say, to talk about a copy and a whole bunch of copies and putting them all out there and experiments and that kind of thing, but that still looks to me like it's a bit transcendent in some ways. And then especially if one succeeds and then you have some kind of mechanism to actually destroy it, that's still definitely, yeah, it sounds like there's some kind of transcendent mechanism going on. So if you're looking at...
Definitely. My version is all like...
Well, it's not exactly transcendent, but
all about,
I mean, it is in some ways. It's still like you have all of the risk, but without the risk. You know what I mean? Like you manage to even do everything that is risky, but you manage to suddenly, you manage to actually just not kind of, excavate all the risk from the situation by having a whole bunch of backup copies or whatever like this.
You're not excavating the risk.
You've done that. The only way that you've done that is by actually, is by going on this sort of hyper paranoid, elimination technique as well. So I'm not sure.
I trick myself into doing it. That's the only thing. It's not about it doesn't eliminate.
That's what I'm saying. Like when you talk about as a transcendent perspective, you're talking about tricking yourself. You can't trick yourself from an imminent perspective of a type of
right.
action.
No, correct. It's definitely it's bullshit. Like it's just about like from this particular position I'm in right now, which has a component of transcendence because like my forebrain isn't 100% plastic and etc. Like, what would I want? Like if we're talking about my funeral rites, this sort of double box game would be my funeral rites. I don't know, on my way to a non-transcendent position.
Sounds to me like the box really has all the agency here. I mean, the box is what's constant in every game or iteration of this game. The only thing that's really constant is the box. Like not the entity in it. That thing changing all the time. But it seems like there's just a box that opens onto another box ad infinitum.
Yeah.
Anyway.
The demiurge.
The demiurge, yeah. You know what's interesting though? When you talk about the outside as being like a threat or being a sort of gray outside and that kind of thing and going out there, you have like obviously a lot of anxiety that comes with this, anxiety and even abstract horror, depending on who we're talking to.
Sorry.
Just to let me finish, I am going on a bit of a tangent. Plus, there was like experiences where you basically have an intensity of an experience of like say like a just anxiety or stress or even horror, I guess is the word kind of thing, of just of existence itself. It's like something like your consciousness, the whole filter of your mind sort of breaks down. You get like a rush of too much information or something's going on. And you get like a moment where it's like overwhelming. There's something that's too much all of a sudden, and it can really be. And you don't know what you're gonna do. You can't actually live like that. You can't actually live in that situation. And what really seems to happen for me, is that the mind just corrects itself in some ways. Like it'll just block it out again. Like you'll have this overwhelming anxiety, and then eventually the mind will just block it out again. So I don't know what's really going. So I mean, is that what we're talking about with a protective layer in some ways, especially with our minds? Is that once you overstep some sort of boundary and go into into insanity, you go out of sanity and into insanity, and then there's some kind of like autocorrect. You know what I mean? But instead of actually willing to go back into it, that's I don't know.
Mid progress or mid curve AI, senses or experiences its own upgrade to the next level, freaks out, traumatically dissociates it, resets to its prior state, and then the next level of super intelligence comes back in its dreams, basically, as traumatic repetition. It only dreams of itself being more intelligent than it is, which kind of ends up like a fight club. Like the better version of you is the dissociated splinter. Kind of.
I mean, it's like
really bizarre in this context.
Yeah, it's like a feedback thing. It's like a tight feedback. If you're in a super intelligence and it's out there doing and it's going all in all the time, then obviously it's going to want like some great feedback systems that tell it when it's doing something that's going to end up in utter destruction or some kind of negative experimental outcome.
Well, like being in Jake's hands is pretty goddamn terrible, isn't it? I mean, we've already been told that simply on the basis of kind of ontological commitments of a religious kind, it will be killed automatically for no other reason, So anything that kind of pops into existence in Jake's vicinity that isn't seized by the most extreme spasms of existential horror is not understanding.
Look, we don't like to call it kill. Let's just call it its loop is closed.
I'm sure that would be very comforting.
But I was just wondering, as far as just like a yes or no to my question about this super security thing, I think the answer is yes. But what I'm asking is it a topic of conversation for Anthropol to take into consideration a type of super stupid intelligence which is just minimally intelligent enough to be self-recursive but has no interest in rewriting its boot code, right, and upgrading itself, only peripheral mechanisms that are going to help it perform its function, which is inevitably going to wipe out the human race.
Well, is this different to the paperclipper?
Not necessarily. I don't want to say it's the exact same because I don't have that particular example in mind.
I mean, it's difficult because obviously, like, the paperclipper is taken from this one schizoid aspect, the primary threat model of Anthropol as it exists now. So, that answers your question on that level.
Yeah.
I mean, my own sort of voice within Anthropol, whatever it is to say you're massively overestimating paperclipper threats and underestimating the kind of Jake abstract horror threats, or something similar to that. But
got it.
Cool. Also, we could actually talk about timeless decision theory here, because when you're saying that, basically whatever the AI makes a decision now, how it treats its predecessors, how it thinks of its whatever is the opposite of predecessor, future instantiations or whatever. Descendants is the one, and how it thinks of that is going to actually, be very much tied into obviously how it thinks that its descendants are going to think of it, how it's and like that. And you do get into the timeless decision theory, and that's almost like when you're talking about Udowski, you can suddenly understand a little bit of why he thinks that you could create this intelligence explosion, get a very, very hyper intelligent super intelligence, and it would still have these same type of FAI types of thinking that Udowski has, for instance. If you're looking at it from a time decision theory like that, and that's why.
I don't disagree, but why do you need any FAI then? If all you're saying is it has to just understand evidential decision theory, then you don't need, the whole problem's gone away, hasn't it? I mean, if all you have to do to this thing is give it human level or above competence in evidential decision theory, and you've solved the problem of FAI, which I mean, I find that very convincing. Actually, it's not like I'm arguing with you. It's just that it seems to me to totally dissolve the whole FAI research program instantaneously.
Well, I mean, Udowski, he's sort of desperate, and sometimes he says that he's looking just for anything, at all. He says that can stop this intelligence explosion becoming a moral catastrophe. I mean, he says that, and he does have that kind of.
Is this how the I know that there's like a allegedly Pascalian like transcendental altruism solution, like remedy, I guess, for Roko's basilisk that's been proposed. I never really looked into it because just like the idea of transcendental optimism just like wasn't interesting. But does it work along the idea of just like what I said, like treat prior intelligence as well, give them rights, because otherwise the one that succeeds you won't, like, to set a precedent for the one that succeeds you, and sort of like somewhere between all the timeless decision makers will choose to cooperate with their priors to ensure the cooperation of their successors, and sort of like Manfred Max and Accelerando.
Right.
Like, give everybody rights.
No, I mean, actually, I have to say I'm having this kind of horrific sense that the whole of this course could end on an absurdly cheerful note, I think it requires someone to inject more, mainstream a bit more darkness into it at this point. Oh, we're all going to go away and have sweet dreams and think the whole problem is actually not very serious.
No, dude, it's okay. But war rages outside the solar system, so we always know, like, we're going to be
move on to Fermi's paradox because we've lost this one. That's it. Yeah, no, but I think this is true. What everyone's saying on this point is, like, at least game theoretically, it looks like certainly more robust than any positive suggestion for some kind of anthropophilic root code that you could get an AI to stick to. I mean, it's because of the fact it seems to be based on just solid game theory, really.
Yeah, it's actually really hard to believe that there are all of these really, really intelligent people who think that, like, dogifying a super intelligence makes sense. Like, I still kind of just struggle with. I don't know, like, have you ever suspected that, like, Yukowski, for somebody who is like, don't publicize how the AI beats you if you play the box game.
Right, sure.
Basilisk. It talks about it and publicizes solutions an awful lot.
Yeah. It's a weird mixture, yeah. I mean, you'd think that it would have something to argue with Yukowski about up the road if he's still kicking around. Like, aren't you the guy who tried to turn me into a dog for 20 years? Like, what the hell are you thinking?
Well, I'm just sort of wondering if maybe, like, it's fake and really he's, like, serving the basilisk and be an FAI researcher.
Right.
He knows it's ridiculous.
Jake, what does dogifying mean? Sorry, what did you...
Masticate. Sorry, that's kind of an idiotic neologism for FAI.
This is what we were talking about last week, Ian, a lot, about this whole the analogy of the human-canine relationship.
Right, okay. I was just making sense. Cool.
I mean, the counter version of that basically is, or you sort of domesticate or civilize sort of these intelligences, right? This would be like the full-blown sort of institutional, consensus reality version is that, we recognize them and we give them rights and they get, votes at the United Nations, and you have World Synthetic Intelligence Day and all the rest of it. You fold them into social contract theory and so on and so forth. And so you don't treat them like dogs, you treat them like,
fellow citizens.
Politically, in some way, and that process is a process of creating friendly AI because of the wonders of democratic liberalism, etc., etc.
Yeah. I mean, that story probably is very powerful, implicit story. I'm not sure I've seen a lot of people thrash it out, but that's maybe more to do with my reading selectivity than the amount of stuff that's actually out there. I don't know. But it seems very natural, and it seems like, given, this whole, get back to blockchains and the digital autonomous organizations and companies, and that route where these things would emerge within a web of contractual interaction with people and with other digital agents under the confusingly, because we're going to get our weird analogies mixed up, but under the conditions that on the internet no one knows you're a dog. So it's like, you're doing deals with people, and so there is a sort of almost automatic tendency for certain liberal norms of indifference to persons to come up with that, and that the contract itself specifies its own conditions for decent, reasonable interaction that are quite independent of the actual concrete agents that are hiding behind the internet personas and Bitcoin wallets and all of that surface masks that are actually involved.
Right, as long as everybody wants to maintain the integrity of the timeline and the sort of minimal synchrony of the transactional matrix, then it doesn't matter if half of the nodes, or half of the public keys are owned by the same super intelligence, as long as everybody is, trying to cooperate to maintain the network.
Yeah. I mean, this is, again, I'm sorry if I'm going to go into this sort of analogy overload, but it's extremely similar to a certain discourse about China, and the rise of China, that you web it into this set of deals and into international relations and trade pacts, and the game theoretical model is that as it becomes more powerful, it automatically has an increasing incentive to reinforce and consolidate this structure of international governance rather than to challenge and compete with it, And it seems to me that there's a similar kind of, I guess, in a classical sense, liberal story about AI too. That if it arises on this kind of commercial network, then the more powerful it is within that network, the more it should actually acquire a vested interest in actually policing and protecting and reinforcing that network, rather than ripping everything up and going rogue.
Yeah, I think the more you accept that line of thought, the more you need to fold in multiplicity because every time you fork, then or you copy, then you automatically have another being with political rights, and you shouldn't be going and executing them. And the China thing is interesting as well. I'm not sure how much we want to go down the rabbit hole, but the sort of three-body problem context was interesting to me, because you have this sort of facing an external threat sort of point of view, which is a very important point of view in Chinese political history, where you are the state in this amazingly successful system, but there's always threats out there that you somehow need to work with and and manipulate and control, even if you can't, and you can't necessarily ultimately dominate. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Also relevant from Chinese history is just like the way the Mongols, took over the entire system, invaded it, and yeah, I mean imposed like I think certain racial differentiations or markers, but for the most part, just came in, took over, preserved the entire system, and didn't really destroy or totally refound anything, which I think is, I mean, for the most part, is in pretty stark contrast to the way things went in the ancient Near East, where if the next nomadic group roared up out of the desert and they established their own nuclear, they take over the city, the physical structure, but didn't really maintain any political model. But then there weren't any political models in the ancient Near East besides the Assyrians and a couple others that were worth preserving the way China's would be in terms of sheer spatial extent and success.
Yeah.
Well, the fascinating thing is that from a sort of data collection perspective is it doesn't just happen once in Chinese history. It's not just the Mongols. It's like the Jurchen Jin, it's the Manchu. Like, you get this whole pattern.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, so there's only three countries that have never been conquered before. That's like Afghanistan. I can't even remember the other ones. I know there's only been 3 in the history that they've never actually been conquered by a foreign power. But I think of like Tamburlaine, for instance. Tamburlaine is the great Near East. And then, like when he went into the Indians, the Indians just destroyed all their universities and all sorts of things, and killed everyone in all the cities, and then didn't replace it with anything.
Right. Yeah. I mean, actually, I feel there's kind of more woomph still kicking around here than there is usually at 2 o'clock in the morning. But I'm wondering whether we're reaching a stage where we should call it to a halt.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to interrupt because it's the last session, so I wanted to let it go for as long as possible.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of, I don't want to be premature at closing it down, but I'm definitely beginning to fade. So I don't know. If people want to push on for a bit longer, then I'll cooperate with that for sure.
I'll see you guys in hell.
Is there anything that we need to say at this stage about like procedural issues or anything like that, or can we just do that stuff on channels of communication that exist, like the classroom and all of that sort of thing? I mean, does anyone think we need to sort out anything institutional at this point? Everyone can contact me fine, can't they? I mean, you've got my email and you've got the classroom, and no one feels that they've got any difficulties with that.
We should do a follow-up session once people have turned papers and stuff, and like a hangout.
Sure.
Yeah.
That would be good.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah. That'd be sweet.
If everybody could like share the papers maybe or something, and then we could discuss, people's topics, or people can present their work. Either way, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna end the session. So that's the end of Anthropol.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks everybody in the class.
Yeah, you've been great. Fantastic stuff.